welcome to the Beginners Handbook. So today we're going to be talking about romance in D&D. So yeah, interesting topic.
Yeah. Well, depends if you're involved, I suppose. But before we start, I'm Jamie, and this is Jordan.
Yep.
And welcome. So if you've not watched anything before or listened to anything before, then we're here doing a podcast focused at new players, beginners, people that might not have even played before. But it doesn't mean that if you're an experienced player that you can't join in and get something from it as well. So you can listen to us on YouTube, Spotify, other major sources for podcasts, and we've got different places that you can engage with us in social media, Discord, Facebook, Instagram, things like that. So go check us out there as well if you want to.
If there's an account, we're probably there. I think it's a safe bet.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, especially if you're an experienced DM, I'm particularly keen to know, how about, have you considered or have you run romance in your games? That'd be something we'd be keen to know, especially for like myself. I'm probably going to have romance in some of my games, and it's not happened before, but I've caved into one of my players, so I thought, why not try it out? So we'd love to hear your thoughts on it. And anything that's happened, would love to hear how you've planned it, how you've maybe negotiated it at the table. If there's any LARPers out there, I'm pretty sure LARPing romance is much more uncomfortable for other players than it is when you're just doing round the tabletop, and when you're not LARPing, that is. But yeah, so and interested in particular around if there's any, how did it go? Was it smooth? Any discomfort? How did you address it? Just love to hear your thoughts.
I'm trying not to laugh at the different euphemisms that have just came up there, but let's move on. So you said there the impending situation that you've got, and that you think you're about to cave.
Yeah.
Are you apprehensive about doing it, or were you apprehensive before? What's changed your mind? What's potentially going to make you change your mind? I'm kind of interested in that. Yeah,
so for me, I think just my initial thoughts on it is, it's just, I've never done it before because a lot of players, it's just one that's never came up. In the games that we've done, it's never came up. But it's partly because we're all guys playing these silly characters, it's never been at the forefront.
Yeah.
But it's just something I've never done, and I had the kind of had a preconception of it just kind of being a bit awkward for people around the table that maybe weren't involved in it. And when we say romance, by the way, I mean like player character on player character romance, not player character and NPC. I've done plenty of NPC and player character because you can make jokes about it and make it fun and light. But when it's player versus or player on player action for it, it's like I can imagine, I've seen it at tables, I've never ran it, but I've seen it at tables, and it's just a bit kind of, yeah, I mean, sometimes it's cute, but most of the time it's kind of like, oh right, we get it, you can, after the game you can go and discuss that romance further, because it tends to be partners that do it, unless there's sexual tension at the table, but so it's something, so it's one of these things that one of my players, we'll call him Shaggy. We'll call him Shaggy. Great guy. He's one of the guys I'm saying recently, but it's maybe about a year ago now. They picked up, or we managed to get a game here at my table and just run their first game of D&D. It was initially a one shot, and they just went, we'd love to play more. And throughout that period, while we haven't played every single week, it's something that we've had loads of stuff happen in it. We've done silly romancy bits, but it's never been player on player. But more recently, Shaggy's girlfriend, who I can't think of a quick name off the top of my head for them, but she's joined the games as well. Velma, that'll do. So Shaggy and Velma. But yeah, so, and it's been awesome to have her playing as well, because she's actually quite experienced at D&D, and she actually streams it and stuff a lot. I would plug it, but I have no idea what the channel name is, because Kieran, oh there we go, I've said his name.
We'll just drop the audio there, or?
It doesn't matter, who cares. Anyway, my pal Shaggy, So we've just never actually found out the stream, otherwise I would plug it. But yeah, it's been great to have them, and it was Shaggy that approached me, and he'd asked about romance, and this is when I thought, it's never occurred to me about running romance in a game. So, and I wasn't resistant to the idea when I heard it. I just kind of thought, oh, you know, because people have seen things like Critical Role and they do romance as well, but they're like professional voice actors, and half of them are all going out with each other and they're married and stuff, you know. So, I mean, although I suppose some of them are having relationships with other characters. Not saying that, there's Travis and anyway. Yeah, so it's never come up, and I just thought, how's this going to work? Because initially I was kind of like, oh, I kind of hope I don't. I was worried about putting the guy down for it, because he's actually been an amazing player, super dedicated, super into backstory. He's always sending me stuff we'd love to have.
Yeah.
So I kind of want to be like, well, I would love to facilitate it, because he's been really keen. I mean, the whole group has been really keen. Just they've always been present and things.
Yeah, and I suppose that sort of ties in a little bit to what we've talked about in the past, which is if you're there as the DM, it's not necessarily about your idea for the story and your idea all the time. It's, you know, personally for me, and I think you're the same, that the best DMs are the ones that take on as much from the players as they give to stories as well. So I get that at that point, although you might be feeling uncomfortable, if it's something that they've asked about and wanting to do and explore and whatever else, that you kind of not feel pressured. That's probably the wrong way of describing it, but there's that kind of, I suppose, want to kind of facilitate that for them.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is because it's never, I mean, going as far to say uncomfortable, I don't know. It's at first my reaction, I wouldn't have said no, but at first my reaction was kind of like, oh, it just sounds complicated. It sounds a bit messy to kind of add in, especially with the group dynamic they've got. And there's some of the players, they can't make it every week and stuff, you know. So it turns out that it might not really work long term in terms of story and character development, etc. But I think for me, especially because everybody at that group's super dedicated, you know, and I thought, you know what, why not have something? I mean, they're asking for something like that. Why not introduce it, you know, if that's what they want? So it's been an interesting, I'm about to maybe start introducing it from tomorrow night, because we're recording this today, but I'm actually seeing the whole bunch, the whole gang tomorrow, and we'll be introducing some of those elements. So it's just one of these things. Initially I would have been a bit kind of like, I don't know about that, but kind of as I've played more, especially with this group, it's made me think, how can I actually try and introduce it? So I think in this episode I'm probably going to vent some ideas of what my thought processes are with it.
Yeah, so just kind of jumping in there with what you were saying there. Is it more about this group, because you've said that Shaggy there, he's he's a really good player, he's enthusiastic, and, you know, he's ticking all the boxes as to what a model player should be. So is it more that the group of players themselves have given you the confidence, would you say, for tackling this, or is it more you and how you've changed over the past while and just more experience and other things? What would you say is the kind of the bigger of the two things?
That's actually a good question. So it's probably a bit of both. You know, it's not that I would have been uncomfortable doing it before. I think it's more, well, maybe I would have, because I maybe wouldn't have known how to actually do it properly. Whereas I think now, especially partly, you know, the guy's coming in and he's giving me lots of kind of pointers for what he would like to try out. And he's not saying it's hard and stone, this is what he wants to happen, but he's like, here's some pointers we've thought about, you know, and he's not asking for me to factor it in. I think that's part of it as well. It's not something that the guys have set in stone. It's just now that I'm aware, because what I've learned, especially over the last I'd probably say year, because I've been running, you know, double or triple the games that I normally would have ran. What I've realised is actually all I need to do is kind of set up the thing. Really what I've said is, yes, go ahead with the romance, you know, but now it's actually over to them, and I've realised actually it's not really, I don't need to facilitate a lot of that, they'll do it. So and there's ways that I can set up ways for that to help them kind of role play it and stuff, like doing watch together and things was how I started it the last time we played. But so I would say it's a bit of just them being kind of really keen and wanting to offer new ideas and things, and then part of it's probably the experience as well, just for me being up for trying out different things that I maybe wouldn't have, not maybe never have done. It's just I would have maybe thought, I'll stick more to the script, but as I've ran more games, I actually stick less and less to a script. My script is maybe about as long as what I've got for this episode, which is 5 bullet points. But what's your thoughts? So, as somebody that's maybe you've not ran any romance in your games, Jamie, but if I was to come to you, let's say you're running a game for me, and I said, look, I'd love to have romance with this person in the group, and this player on player, what would your thoughts be?
Honestly, I'd probably be uncomfortable, but I'll kind of rework that. So if it was one of the characters that I'd came up with and you'd done it, so it's me and you or me and another player, I'd be uncomfortable. It just for different reasons. Like, again, it's supposed to be a game, it's supposed to be kind of not that serious, and all these other different things. It would just make me uncomfortable and on edge. But if it was you and player X, and then at that point I'd be going, right, I wouldn't be uncomfortable, I just might find it a bit cringy. That would be the thing, and I would obviously at that point be talking to the other player and going, right, okay, well, here's what's been suggested, are you comfortable with this? And then depending on what that answer is would depend on how I would take it forward from that point of view. So I wouldn't necessarily not do it, I would just try and make it as small a part as I could, and just kind of focus on the story moving on, and again, people getting a chance to roll dice and just get on with things rather than getting too bogged down in that. But again, if it was me and another player, just be totally uncomfortable with it. 2 other players, as long as everybody's okay. Again, it just might be a bit cringy depending on
I know what you mean.
Who the players are and whether they're doing it for a laugh or whether they're both deadly serious about it, or depending on what's going on. So that's kind of my thoughts on it at the moment.
It's a hard one, to be honest, because partly what's made me kind of go, when the question was asked, when they popped the question, I wasn't actually resistant to it straight away, which surprised me. I initially thought, oh no, I don't know about that, but that kind of changed quite quick. And I know that if this was 6 months prior, I probably would have been a bit like, I don't know about that. It's interesting though, because the guy that I'm kind of talking about, it was him and his partner connected on D&D early on. That was one of the hobbies that they discovered that they'd done. And then it was like, I would love to have my partner involved and stuff, and it's been a nice and a fun, it's not just been a game thing, it's been a group thing where we've learned a lot about, we became a lot of good friends through it, especially even the guy I'm talking about, his partners became part of that group because of it, So I think part of it for me was like, well, actually, this is how they want. They've got, as far as I know, it's quite limited time together. So I thought, I'd quite like to just allow them to just use that. I'm sure though they're very reasonable. I wouldn't think it would be cringy, but I guess I'll find out. But it's one of these things. I know that the guys will like those, but the other guys, they'll be winding them up something chronic if it gets cringe. But it's just interesting. It's a subject I never thought would really come. It's not that I never thought it would come up. It's just never been at the forefront ever. For me. But it's interesting. So I think kind of to move into the next bit then. For me, it's about actually approaching. I'd like to kind of go through how I'm going to approach it and things. I covered a bit of that, but I'll maybe sound some ideas off of you live, and get your opinion on it.
Right, okay.
So I'm thinking, in terms of how this is going to get approached, for me it's about, I think you said something that's really important, and it's about making sure people are still having fun during the game, getting to roll their dice and things like that.
Yep.
Now, if 2 player characters want to go off and do romantic things together, they don't need to roll their dice for it because they're up for it. But one of the things for me is going to be how do I facilitate that in the game itself, and it's about do you set up encounters for them to allow them to have character growth like that. But then I'm kind of like, is that, so I've got a few ideas about how that's going to happen, whether it be through travelling together, resting together, maybe getting broken off from the rest of the party if they go into just for talk's sake, they're in a dungeon and a big trapdoor kind of splits, or not a trapdoor but a big kind of gate fences them off, and you've got half the party here and half the party there. There's plenty of ways I can facilitate it, but for me I think my approach is going to be quite light with it, because again it's just a bit fun. I think that was the important thing that you said. Well, not just in romance but anything really. If you want a serious and scary story or a slapstick swashbuckling story, I think the key thing is people have fun. Yeah.
I mean, again, just touching on that, ultimately it doesn't matter what kind of game you're doing. If the people that are there aren't enjoying it, if they're not having fun, something's not right. Whether that's they've came in with one expectation and they're getting a different result, or whatever it happens to be. The long and the short is, if the person that's there isn't enjoying themselves, if they're not having fun, they're either going to get fed up with the game, they're not going to come back, whatever permutation that ends up being. So something's not right, something needs fixed. But again, that's kind of a different topic for a different episode. But when it comes to the romance side of things, if you're laying it on heavy and you've got somebody that's like a religious zealot there or whatever, then chances are they're not having fun. Chances are they're going home. They're praying for your atonement, and you're never seeing them again.
Do you know, that's interesting? There's games I do or either run or play on Monday nights at the local comic shop, and there's been a bit of, now that I'm actually talking about it, I've just realised there's almost a bit of kind of PC on PC romance brewing. And I know for the rest of the group, it's one of the members that I don't know who they get on with in the group, because half the time there's so many people, it's like 7 people, and you're at a long table and it's very loud, so depending what side you sit, you can only hear half of the table, but I know from some of the faces that it looks like there's a player that's pushing on. I'm talking about having fun with romance, but it looks like one of the players is pushing on romantic elements because they want to have a romantic, I don't know if they're looking for a romantic experience at the table, or if they just want to do something funny and aloof. So actually, to maybe take the attention off of approaching romance, I wonder how would you, if you, let's say that romance occurs at the table, 2 players verbally getting it on, what would your approach be to help maybe to solve uncomfortable romance at the table? Because you said running a game you wouldn't want to do it yourself with another PC, for whatever reasons. How would you address it if it did get uncomfortable, out of curiosity?
That's a good question.
I'm about to find out, maybe.
Exactly. Should be recording this in 2 days' time.
Yes. Well, we can do a part 2.
Yeah.
Where are they now, sort of thing? They've broke up.
Well, it could be by the time this gets released.
We'll see.
Yeah. Not that you're wishing that in Shaggy and Velma, of course.
No, of course not. No,
Childhood ruined everywhere.
Yes.
But sorry, what was the question? I've kind of lost the thread there a second.
How would you handle?
How would I handle it if it became uncomfortable?
Yeah, I'm just curious, for somebody that's maybe not ran or had these romantic. Well, I've not either, but
again, one of the things that I think of the DM as being, and again we might mention this in a previous episode depending on what you've listened to, is the DM is like the referee. So they are there to solve disputes, enforce role. Well, not enforce roles. That's maybe giving you the kind of wrong idea of how it sounds. But they're there to make sure rules are followed, and and so on and so on. They're there to keep the flow, right? So if you get anybody that's starting to feel uncomfortable, that's there, then the DM obviously needs to jump in and stop it. Okay. And they don't need to be as brutal as just turning around and going, right, so and so and so and so, wrap it,
or else
or else get off the table. Well, hopefully they're not on the table, but so basically they need to step in and they need to stop it. Now, whether again it's right, okay, and they go, right, okay, we're going to jump forward in time to the next day or this or that, or whatever, whether they're skipping forward in time, whether they leave those two players and then focus on other players so that the story's again keeping moving and whatever else, or again whether they turn around and just point blank go, right, okay, we're stopping this here because, and then rather than saying because I think other people are getting uncomfortable, because then if you do have somebody that's there that's uncomfortable, they might then be embarrassed. You then might get players starting to get, a bit annoyed and going, right, well, what was I doing? How's this wrong? And, you might start getting things like that. So as the DM, what I would probably do at that point is take the blame and go, look, I'm starting to get a bit uncomfortable here. So let's just stop it here. I know what you're doing, blah, 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 but it's me, it's not you. And then move on from that point. And I think that's probably a valuable thing for any circumstance that will pop up. If you think other people at the table are uncomfortable, don't say that other people at the table are uncomfortable, because again, you might get tension within the group. Quickest way to avoid that is just take the blame yourself. Because if you're there and you're running it, then everybody needs to accept before the game happens that most of this is going to be on your terms, because you've got a lot of organising to do, you've got the story to come up with, you've got encounters to manage, you've got cities, towns, whatever, you've got a lot of stuff going on, so the players need to be understanding with you. So if you take the blame, then you're taking the bullet for somebody else, but what you're doing is you're ensuring that the group dynamic is staying good, and that afterwards you can have a word on the side with whoever and go, look, I seen that this was happening and I thought you were a bit uncomfortable, so that's why I said that. Is that the case? Is that not the case? Don't worry if it is, don't worry if it isn't, but here's what I think, here's what I've done, are you okay, blah blah blah, move on. So I think that's probably the best thing that you can do. But again, as to exactly how you deal with it, it's got to be based on your players and what they're like. If you've got a robust group there, you can just, straight away, just off the bat, turn around and go, no, this isn't happening. Here's where the rules are, clarify, move on. And again, it's probably good at that point, if you are just totally vetoing it at that point, that you reinforce, and again, that's maybe kind of quite draconian sounding, but you explain what you're comfortable with or what other players are comfortable with, depending on how the situation's playing out, where the boundaries are, establish it and then move on. If you've got a more sensitive group there, then at that point, again, maybe just, like I was saying before, just find a way of moving the story on. If it's two people and they're in a tavern and they're sitting and they're drinking and, flirting's happening or, whatever, and you can see that that's moving and accelerating, cut away at that point, because everybody can use their own imagination, everybody can figure out what's going on, focus on other characters, right, okay, it's the next day. If you then get the players going, oh, but we wanted to, whatever, just ask them what they wanted to do, out of character. What did you want to do? This and this, right, okay, that's fine, you can do that, whatever. you've bought more drinks, so mark off X amount of cash and this and that and whatever. And there's a creative way to punish them as well. You were there for so long and you were drinking so much that you got your wallet stole, so mark off 8,000 gold. You know, there's other things you can do to kind of rein things like that in if you're super uncomfortable and you really don't want anything like that to be happening. But for the most part, just let things play out. Talk to people afterwards, keep the flow going, and at the end of the day, remember you're there to be the referee, the person that's enforcing. Again, keep saying enforcing, shows you my mindset. You're there to be making sure the game's got a flow, nobody's sitting about, nobody's feeling uncomfortable, so don't worry if you need to just cut across the story, hit the pause button, re-explain what's going on, and then restart again. Don't worry about doing it. Ideally you avoid it because you're putting that break in the story or whatever's going on. So try keep things moving, try find a creative way of doing it, but if you need to, don't worry about doing it. Remember, you're there to be keeping everybody happy, and the worst thing you want is people feeling uncomfortable.
Do you know, I think a lot of what you've said, it kind of goes back to communication. It goes back to speaking, and I think we bang that drum all the time. But I think for me, it's funny because you spoke about punishing them for like, oh, you've been out this long, you lost your wallet for like 8,000 gold. We had a non-romantic experience with that recently when your big guy of two years died, and we lost a 10,000 gold magic item that we just had.
It was only 6.
Was it
only 6?
Where did I get 10,000 from? I don't know.
It
felt like 10,000.
There was other things that we were going to get as well.
Oh, right, okay.
There was other things we were planning on buying. We didn't buy those other things because they would take longer to make. So
that's right.
We done the magic item for my character, and then like within 1.5 games he get killed and the magic item was lost.
Yeah, it's a shame. I wonder who did that.
Yeah.
But yeah, spoiler, it was me playing an NPC.
Yeah.
But so what you're saying there, it kind of actually it makes romance not really sound like a big deal to have. We've all heard of the horror stories, and there's plenty of online stories you can hear about. I mean, there's like there's a Reddit post my sister told me about it. I can't mind. There's a Reddit subreddit anyway that covers horror stories or something when you're playing D&D, and some of the stuff my sister was telling me about, I'm going, oh my god, it would be enough to put you off wanting to play D&D.
Yeah.
But it feels like a lot of it, to be honest, is like, and if you're actually somebody listening that's wanting to have romance in your game, talk to your DM about it and see what they say, because they actually might have done it before, and it goes back to what you're saying. If people get uncomfortable, you can talk to people separately about it. And actually it makes it a lot easier. I had this mindset before, but actually talking about it tonight is I'm actually looking forward to it a bit more, because it feels like it's going to be more collaborative than something that I need to worry about, So yeah, it feels like just like everything else in a role-playing game, whether it be making a character, conflict with player versus player, encouraging your players to maybe run some games, whatever it may be, even just organising your flaming games, which can be a job in itself. It kind of sounds like just doing it, it can, just talking about it and then just seeing how to facilitate it in a kind of respectful way.
And I mean, that's the thing, if you've got good communication at the table, and if you've got good communication from player to DM to player, and player to player, a lot of things that could become issues, that 9 times out of 10 become issues, get eliminated. And I think that's pretty much, again, like you're kind of touching on there, that for any situation that you can pretty much roll that out. And I think another kind of point with like two players, if they're wanting to go down that road, if it's not been discussed beforehand, and so on, like make it as not extreme, that's not the right word, but like break the communication rule as much as possible for this scenario. And you've got one player talking to the other player and then going down the romantic route. Then you go, right, okay, stop for a second. Remember, at the end of the day, that group of people that are sitting at the table, they're that group of people. So you're either all friends or you're a bunch of people that know each other through playing D&D or whatever, and so on and so on. You're not actually the character, right? So you might be super into the game, you might stay in character from minute one to the end of the game, but it doesn't necessarily mean that every single other player there is like that, and it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody there is as comfortable as going down that kind of acting route, if you like. So that's probably a thing that's running there. Yeah, you're playing the character, yeah, you're doing whatever as per your story arc and blah blah blah, but at the end of the day, you're still Steve that's sitting at the table or whatever with whoever else. So bear that in mind. No matter what you say and no matter what you do, okay, it might be through the game and whatever else, but at the end of the day, if things start to escalate and somebody takes offence or whatever else, they're not blaming your character for at that point, they're blaming you. Bear that one in mind as well, that in houses objects can be thrown.
Improvised weapons, if it was called Cthulhu, or D&D, I suppose. Do you know, I was actually going to go on to once romance has happened, how would I approach it? Just although I've not really ran it before, but I think just as a wee side note, just based off of what you were saying, because it's a good point. Sometimes you might, if you're a DM, and listening and you've never had this, thing is, I've had great communication. I've been very fortunate that the guys that I tend to play with the most, and that includes yourselves with the guys that we normally play with, but even the guys that I'm using as reference for tonight, we are more than
Shaggy Velma Mystery Incorporated.
What I'm thinking is we're more we talk, we communicate, and it's something that we all do really well, but there might actually be times where it almost just organically happens, and then at that point is how do you address it, especially if you see, at that point, is it something that when you see it, to get your opinion, Jamie, if something like that organically came up, would that be something that you would then say to the guys, hey, I can see there's a romance, or like, let's say it's pretty clear that they're having a romantic segment coming in their into the story, no pun intended, and it wasn't something that was discussed with you, is that something that you would want to maybe discuss with them once it's been identified as romantic? I'm just wondering. I know what I would do, but
100%. And again, it's kind of going back to the communication side of things rather than looking at it from the point of view of being upset that this hasn't been discussed with you as the DM, because the best ideas are the ones that just come straight off the top of somebody's head, and they happen, and it's spontaneous, and whatever else. So if you've got two characters and everybody's all fine, everybody's all comfortable, and then the two characters, they start developing their own romantic story arc. They might not 100% necessarily be aware that that's the direction it's heading, but if you've got not suspicion, that's the wrong word, but if you if your antenna goes and you go, right, okay, I can see where this is potentially going to head, talk to them both individually about it, work out what they're comfortable with, and then at that point, then talk to the two of them about it. That's if it's going to go ahead and it's going to proceed. If one of them's totally not up for doing it, then you again take the bullet and you deal with it and go, right, okay, so and so's not comfortable with this, so I'm not saying you're doing anything wrong, blah blah blah, but if this continues, they're going to feel uncomfortable and it's just not happening. So it's I suppose it's about being switched on at that point. So that's what I would do. I would 100% talk to them and deal with it, if you like, rather than just kind of ignoring it and seeing what happens and hoping that nothing happens. Because at that point, depending on how big your group is, but if you split it, you've got person A that's involved in the romance, person B that's involved in the romance, you've got you, and then you've got everybody else at the table. If any of those groups are uncomfortable, then you need to just stop it. If any of those groups are uncomfortable at a certain point, then you can let it develop to that point, but then you need to stop it. If everybody's all okay and everything's all fine, then you can just let that run and do whatever it's going to do. But the worst thing that you can do is just not say anything and let it happen. Now, if you've already before the game told everybody, right, okay, here's my feelings on romance as a subject, and everybody's all clear with that, fine, fair enough. You don't need to address that. You've already addressed it. If it's been a while since you've done that, then you might need to just remind and point out. But as long as they're within whatever parameters you've set at the start, you don't need to worry about doing that. You can kind of ease off. But I think the worst thing that you can do is not talk about it and not address it if you see it happening. But again, don't take half that they're doing something and they haven't discussed it with you, and don't fire them a WhatsApp going, it'd be nice if you could give me a heads up next time. Don't do anything like that. It's all fine, it's all okay, nobody's going out their way to be difficult. But again, I suppose the kind of main thing with the DM is that you're switched on to what's happening with the players. If you're not switched on, then somebody's going to get uncomfortable, somebody's going to be bored, somebody's going to be doing a lot of talking while other people aren't, people are going to feel shut out, but whatever the situation is in any game, if you're not switched on, if you're not reading the room, again, you're going to run into problems as a DM. So trust your instincts, and again, don't worry about having to talk to people about things, because the more left unsaid, the bigger and bigger and bigger an issue that becomes. Even if it isn't an issue, then talking to them isn't going to do anything. You're not going to make things worse by doing that.
I think that's something that I'm trying to think, if this had happened, let's say I hadn't spoke to Shaggy about this before it had happened, I'm thinking, what would I have done? Would I have actually been bringing it up as a topic? I'm actually maybe more in the fence of I think I'm more on the fence if I would have let it happen for a bit. I mean, the thing is that everybody would have been aware of it, especially because at least in my case, the two individuals are already going out in real life, so we wouldn't know what was happening. But I think partly that is just because we know each other really well. So, but I wonder if it sounds like if you're wanting this sort of stuff, if you're running the game and you're identifying it, there's nothing wrong with chatting to the guys, and definitely don't chat to whoever it is what I mean. And definitely don't be upset if they've not gave you a heads up, because there's nothing worse, even outside of romance, there's nothing worse when you think you're doing something really cool, when you're giving cool questions, then you get a text from the DM saying, next time you want to ask me this, please give me a heads up. But it gives the wrong impression, because really the DM should be taking that on board, and even forgetting romance and anything, it's up to them to mandate that story, and if they've not got a good answer, then it's fine, they're only human.
And I just a kind of side point to all of this, if you as a DM, you need to to talk to somebody about whatever issue that's going on, try and avoid text as much as humanly possible. I'm kind of guilty of just, I'll just send the text, I'll just this, do that, whatever.
Well, me too.
But the thing with text is that you can read it different ways because you're having to interpret tone. Whereas when you're on a phone call or voice call or whatever, or when you're actually physically in person,
sure,
you can have a chat with somebody, they can see your facial expressions, they can hear the tone in your voice. If they're not sure, they're there, they can ask questions. And the flip side of that, when you're talking to them, you can see their facial expressions, you can see their tone, and so on and so on. So it means that you don't get messages that get misconstrued and turn into something and become an issue when there never was an issue, when both people were in agreement and both saying the same thing. So I would just a wee kind of red flag there. Try do it either phone, voice call, or in person, depending on what you're doing. And the thing is as well, most things a wee 5-10 minute chat before the game, and it's done, it's sorted, and that's it. And again, obviously as well, it depends on your individual players. If you've got people that are, again, a bit timid and whatever, arranging an out-of-game phone call with them when you normally text and so on, that can potentially seem more ominous, and that can potentially make things worse for them, stress them out or whatever. So again, at that point, in the game, if you're doing it online or if you're doing it in person or whatever, just grab them, pull them aside for a wee 5-10 minutes and have a chat. Something I never thought I'd talk about in this episode, but if you're using Roll20, as the DM, there is a feature on each of the chat boxes.
That's right.
It looks like a little speech bubble. If you click that, it'll open up a private chat with you and that other person, so all the other windows will get greyed out so nobody else can hear what you're saying, and then you can just talk if it's something that's, again, maybe a bit personal, private, whatever. You can do that. If it's a general thing for the group, again, that's another way of doing it. Don't specifically talk to them, talk to the group in general. And just as a tip for future games, you can also do that if you want to pass a player a bit of information that they've to get that nobody else is to get for whatever storytelling reason.
Yeah, it's a good point, I think, because what I tend to do, although I'm also guilty of just texting people, but what I tend to do is, for example, the guys that I've been speaking about before, when we started, I was quite, I thought it was one shot, and I didn't think they would be that interested in playing again anytime soon. So when it came to make their characters, it was just, there you go make the guys. I said, do what you want. What I do is build up your sheets, go through D&D Beyond or anything that you're doing to build your characters, and send me the sheet, and we can talk about whatever. And that was fine, and it got to the point where we finished that one shot, and then the guys went, I want to play more, and they wanted to continue the story, and I was like, oh, that's great. I've never thought that people would want to do that at all. So I had to then make the story better, but some of the players had backstory stuff, like they owned the whole world basically, and I said to him, like, it's a bit much, but like, it's a one shot, who cares? But that gave me problems going wider, because it just didn't make sense with the kind of setting for that world which I'd created, and none of it really made, quite a few of the characters, I'd say a couple of them, didn't make a lot of sense, but it's fine because it was a one shot. But it then came time that I thought, well, I need to start honing that in, and particularly one of the guys kind of feel like I've given the short end of the stick a bit, because it's usually something that I'll need to go back, even now I need to double check a couple things and just maybe tone it down a bit, but that's sometimes when you're doing impromptu games, that's going to happen, don't be worried about it. But for me, the way I approach that stuff, it's similar to you. It's like I tend to say, hey, look, I'm preparing a game, because usually I am when I'm talking about it. I'd like to go over a couple of details if they're free, and I get a phone call usually with them, or FaceTime or something, just to usually give people a wee bit, especially if it's something like, oh, your backstory needs completely changed. Well, I wouldn't say that, but I would suggest it in other ways.
Yeah.
But the little reward for them is to get a little bit behind the curtain, you know, because I'll give them backstory that they can tweak, you know, or I'll give them themes that they can tweak into their story.
Yeah.
So it would be the same with romance, I would guess, as well.
Yeah. So rather than turning around and going, right, okay, totally rip that up and get rid of it, you go, right, okay, I see what you said here, but instead of this, why not this, you know, and tweak until it's something that's appropriate.
Totally. It's good. It's something that actually, the longer we've spoke about it, the easier it's actually sounding to actually do, because I didn't think it would be hard, and the fact is the guys that I'm going to be running this with, they're all brilliant, you know, they're a riot every time we play and constantly keeping me on my toes, you know, but it just really, especially because we get on and we're very comfortable, you know, it doesn't sound like this is going to be an issue at all. It's going to be something that is going to be about, let's just facilitate it, and we're all aware that we're going to do it, although I don't think it's official yet. It'll be official from tomorrow that the romance is happening. I'm sure the other guys don't know yet, actually, because it's not really came up yet, because we've not played.
Yeah.
But so I would say that's cool. So we've kind of talked about having players approach it, or you approaching players about it, whether or not it was you were told in advance or not, and how you would approach that going forward. We talked about dealing with the difficult parts of it as well. So, but let's say, however it's come about, we now know, at least the table's aware that romance is going to happen. You know, there's no option now, there's no turning back. For me, my kind of idea for this, and I'd be interested to hear anyone that's listening or watching, I'd like to hear your opinions on it in particular, because for me, a lot of D&D, and I think a lot of my style of running games now has become a much more of a enjoying the journey, you know, rather than the kind of key points. You know, if somebody wants to do a story I've made, I'm not going to force them to sit through all the cool story beats I've made, you know. If they want to go and basically screw up the story, fine by me, because it's about the journey and ultimately about the players actually having fun, because if they're having fun, I'm having fun. So for me, that would be things like not diving into details of romance. I think you covered earlier just things like I'm trying to think, you mentioned something about you know, you can cut at a tavern, you don't need the details. It would be the same thing for romance for me, you know, because again, it's about the players, and you'll get an idea around the table, people get uncomfortable, and I suppose that would let you skip some of the details. But what is good is it's not just about enjoying, for me, the kind of journey of having players do that, because for them actually a lot of their experience will probably be hinged on the fact that if people want romance like what I've been asked for, then actually that's going to enhance their experience a bit as well. So for me, a lot of my approach for it is going to be, okay, well, allowing them that space to be able to do that stuff is going to be something like, I know this has been coming for a while, this romance thing, but the last game I had them both on watch, and I'd seen some of them, you know, trying to start the romance a bit, and it was a little interesting.
How did the other players react, if you don't mind?
They thought it was dead funny. That's fine, they thought it was dead funny, just like, right, because you're a couple, you know, so they totally were on board for it, you know, but it wasn't really something that I think was going to be pursued, and it still might not be something that's long term pursued, you know. It might just be a kind of fleeting romance just to try it out in the game. But I think for me then, it's just now that I'm aware that's what they're kind of keen to have, just because it's the first time they've shared a space in D&D together. So I would quite like to be able to allow them to enjoy that experience that they're looking for in it, you know, while trying to balance giving players their time as well to do their own thing. But I suppose for me, after talking a lot more, I think I had other things I was going to bring up with this, but to me it kind of seems actually it's just like any other thing in D&D, you know. D&D's very good at power fantasy, you know, so allowing players to do cool stuff and cool kills, like for example the guys I'm talking about, their second game or third game, I think this big evil baddie ran away and they all get attacks of opportunity, you know, and I could tell they all wanted to kill the bad guy, and the bad guy had 2 hit points, and the first person that hit him killed him. But I'm like, well, now let me just, you know, I knew they all wanted to do something cool, so I let them all do attacks of opportunity, and they all hit, you know. So it meant that when they killed the bad guy, I let them do a triple kill and they split the guy in half or something silly. I can't remember exactly. They still talk about that to this day, you know, because it was a big moment for them.
And now you've just given it away.
Yeah, it's a huge moment, you know, and it was because it was me allowing or facilitating them kind of enjoying those beats they wanted. And I suppose kind of going forward that'll be my same thing with romantic stuff as well, because I'm sure it's not as bad as it sounds when you look at some of the stuff online about it, especially the kind of bad stories that you hear.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, the thing is, like, if you've got a good group of players, or on the flip side, if you're a player with a good DM, then you're going to avoid the horror stories because, again, you've either got somebody that's switched on that can put limits here and there, or can just end it, or, you know, whatever, or you've got a group that's, you know, again, communicating well, or, you know, whatever it is that's avoiding the pitfalls, the traps, then, you know, it's going to work out well, and you're going to avoid those stories, or a situation like one of the stories that you hear. And to me, I think 9 times out of 10, when you see stuff like that, you go, that's a group that's poorly matched, or you've got
makes sense.
a DM that's maybe not quite super experienced, or you know, whatever it is, you go, there is some issue there that relates to the wider game, not just this one element. And again, as well, as long as everybody's being kind of respectful, you know, that's, I suppose, the thing at the end of the day, that you go, well, when you've got everybody turning up, you've got different personalities that are there. You have people that are confident, less confident, you know, quiet, loud, you know, whatever. So as long as you've got everybody that's, again, respecting one another, and, you know, stepping back and giving the quieter players a chance to speak, and, you know, all this sort of stuff, then again, I think you'll avoid most issues with it.
Yeah, that actually comes on, really, I think my last point, you know, for this was going to be about respect, and just a couple of comments I had and thoughts, because I know just how to be respectful for any PC, cross PC stuff that's happening. You said something there that it kind of made me think about something else, but I can't remember what it was off the top of my head. But so I might come back to it. But yeah, so being respectful, I think for me, our games tend to be quite, you know, like the games we do, you know, especially with our kind of core group, they are very, they're more serious and kind of, you know, they're hardcore. That's probably the best way to put them. It's permadeath for the most part, unless you're very lucky. You know, we do have a cleric, I think, that can heal us, but who knows, that'll cost us who knows how much. But generally, it's like you're dead, you know, you can get insta-killed. You know, when Jamie and I fought at our last game, when I was playing a bad NPC, and I'd get messages saying, don't hold back, and I went, no problem. But that meant Jamie's guy, who I'm gutted still that he's gone, 2 years, out of the surviving members of our group, it was us two, and now it's just me, although, you know, respect to your dwarf, but I just popped his head off, you know, boom, you know, so it's a very serious game, you know, it's basically what I'm saying. Whereas the game that I'm running with the guys, that I was really the influence for this episode for me, we tend to be very jokey. Now, sometimes there has been a bit of conflict at the table because of that, you know, and sometimes, especially the guys frequently drink at the table, so sometimes people talk over each other. The general table manners stuff, it happens, you know, at the best of tables, you know. But our vibe is it is quite a serious story, and it is pretty hardcore. Well, not as hardcore as what we do, but there's a lot of slagging off, and there's a lot of things like that that are happening, that, you know, there's a lot of things that have happened that people have been slagged off for at the table. Both me as DM has done it to others, and as other players at the table have slagged other people off. Like, one of the guys' characters, like, I own you all, basically, super rich and all that. and he usually ends up getting in a fight or battered for it, and his pals don't support him because he made a complete mess of it, you know. And that's part of the dynamic, though. I mean, it's intentional, you know. And when it comes to being respectful at the table, but especially around romance, especially because it's probably personal, you know, it's about just making sure we give people space. I just remembered the thing I was going to say there. And it is, you know, if you are a player that's seeing other players, or if one of your fellow players comes to you and says, look, I'm thinking of doing romance, and you're also playing the game with them, so you're not running it, encourage them. You know, it doesn't have to be the DM that starts these discussions. You know, if you know, if Jamie and I wanted to do something cool in a game, you know, we would sound it out. Let's say we're making 2 characters and we wanted to have some dynamic duel going on for whatever reason. We would definitely be talking about that, probably before even saying to the DM, you know, just to get an idea, like, is this something we want to do? Do you want to do a Tweedledum, Tweedledee type thing?
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
Exactly. There's no point in kind of you coming up with everything and then turning around and saying to whoever it is, right, okay, here's my plan. What do you think? And you just get a straight no.
And they're like, nah.
And you've spent a week designing it and coming up with everything, and then it's just straight for the bin. Yeah,
totally. So I mean, if you've got friends that would like to, let's say you've got your own DM and you're one of the surrounding players, and that this discussion happens, it doesn't have to be a thing where you say, oh, you should speak to the DM. Sound it out, and if you're up for saying it as a player, support whoever it is. Forgetting even romance, you know, if somebody wants to play a stupid character and you think it would be fun and you want to see it, encourage it, you know, just be supportive, and then just goes to say to the DM. It's the same thing with the guys, a different group who there's a couple of blossoming or budding DMs, you know, they're really keen but they're not quite committed, and you know, it's all that stuff, but I'm just there supporting them for it. I'm like, go ahead and do it, you know, we can stop my campaign when you want, you know, there's plenty of stopping points. I mean, if you really want to stop it, I could kill all of you in one game. But it's the same thing for doing PC romance. I think the only time would be, you know, if you're playing it and there's other people doing it, I would just be respectful, because there's been times at some of the tables I've been at where sometimes somebody's doing an emotional moment or they're trying to get their role play on. It might even be somebody that's maybe a wee bit insecure about role playing or doing a voice, you know, and somebody's went, oh, that's a crap accent, and they tried their best to do some terrible southern accent, let's say. You know, and that can be, as a rule of thumb, you know, as a player, definitely, well, especially as DM, but also as players, be respectful for that stuff as well. You know, if you know that your pals are wanting to do romance and you said that's cool, and they start doing it and you're a bit like, I don't like it, you know, you don't need to be like, that's manky, you know, you don't need to, don't put them down. There's ways that you can say it nicely, you know, just be respectful about it, you know, because otherwise you might, you know, I can't remember the phrase, but you might put them off to the point where they kind of shut off. And I've seen that at tables as well, you know, I've seen that at one of my tables where somebody was getting talked over and I had no idea because it was chaos at that game in particular. But because the guy quieted down as well, you know, I never noticed him as much. And then when I asked him about stuff, he was like, oh no, it's fine, I'm not interested in looking, you know, I'm doing my own thing. You know, I was like, oh cool, he's busy. But what had actually happened was he was kind of dismissed by one of the other players, you know, and it's the same thing inside or outside the romance, you know, it's worth just be respectful to other players about it. Who knows, maybe that'll be a topic in its own at a later episode. I can tell you all the good and bad experiences I've had with table manners. And I think the last thing about being respectful for me would be if you're actually the people participating in romance. Now, I've not had this myself, I've not really seen it much yet. But if you are the people who are having the romantic experiences, just all I would say is just be aware. Now, if you're close, like either us or the other guys I've been using as the kind of the influence for this episode, it's less likely to happen in our groups. This group I'm talking about, or ours personally, Jamie. But especially if it's like Monday nights I go to the local comic shop, and if romance was to kick off there, we're not great. I mean, we're friends, but we know each other and we get on, but it's not like we're best pals, you know. So if I kicked into participating in romance with another player, let's say somebody actually said yeah and agreed to it, for me it's just about going, right, I should be conscious about what sort of stuff and details and things I'm doing to be respectful for others at the table who aren't participating in it, unless you want some big 3, 4 or 5 way. But other than that, it's just a word of caution, just to make sure that if it's not a group that you're comfortable or spent a lot of time with, it's worth just making sure you just be reasonable with it. And like Jamie said, it's not about divulging too much of the detail. I mean, you can use your imagination, and if you actually go out, you can go and perform it later on. It doesn't need to be happening at the table. But so I think that's my real last point for this. Is there any kind of comments about that?
Just kind of quickly with what you're saying there, and again, might seem obvious depending on how switched on you are, but if you're depending on where you are as well, the environment, that's going to make this comfortable, more uncomfortable or less uncomfortable. Yeah. As an example, when me and Jordan, when we are playing with, again, our core group, it's in a house where it's just the people that are playing the game in the house. That's it. So it's as private as it can possibly be. Yeah. So should something like that, like a romantic arc, appear, then the only way that becomes uncomfortable is if the people at the table are uncomfortable with it. Yeah. With what you were saying with one of your other groups that you aren't as close to. Okay, that's one element that may make it more uncomfortable, but the major thing in that situation is you are playing at a local comic shop, so it's not just the people at your table, it's the people at the next table, it's the guy walking past you, it's it's public, it's on display, everybody can see it, and if you're not comfortable, you're majorly uncomfortable at that point. Although the benefit is you're in a comic shop, so there's lots of things to avert your gaze towards and not look like you're staring at the ceiling or something. But again, like, that is a point that, again, I didn't really consider that up until you kind of mentioned that there, and then it just sort of clicked. The actual environment that you're in will change how comfortable you are. And again, even things like being in a house, well, if you're in a house that if you're still living in it with your parents, or whatever, like, if you're in the at the kitchen table or whatever, and somebody walks through and they're in for a box of biscuits or whatever else, and we might be cutting in and out, if you're in the middle of that and you're a bit uncomfortable about it, then just be aware that you might be getting disrupted, and so on and so on and so on. So environment will play a factor in it as well.
That's actually interesting, because I was speaking to one of my friends who they actually played at a local comic shop, and they stopped, and I've just realised it was because of all the COVID stuff that was going on, so they started just doing home games, as if that changes when they're all sticking together for 7 hours. But and one of the things, there was a lot of particular, so it wasn't quite romantic, there was some evil, probably, I'm assuming, I just remember hearing it, and I just kind of went, I personally wouldn't have something like that in my game, because it's quite extreme. For D&D, I mean, I play things like Cult, Divinity Lost and Call of Cthulhu. They tend to be miserable. Cult in particular has a big focus on like themes of abuse and all that sort of stuff, so you need to be quite careful with it, I find sometimes. But I was hearing some of the stories that they were doing. It sounded a lot of fun, because they asked me to play with them at one point, and I was kind of like, well, I'm actually already at this group, so it's kind of like how to balance it. So it's just kind of not worked out. But a lot of their content in particular is very sexual, so a lot of that kind of comes across then as romantic, both explicit and violent sexual stuff happening in it. And it's now starting to happen where it's the DMs having it with one of the players. I'm kind of going, I remember speaking to the person, and they didn't say it, but I was quite overtly kind of like, oh no, I got the impression that it was kind of like, well, is everyone into that? I mean, it's up to, if that's what the guy wants to do and everybody's up for it, that's fine. But it kind of goes back to, if you're going to facilitate that, or at least start or instigate it as DM, just be respectful of what other people's boundaries might be. And if you're a player that wants to have something, especially something that might be more violent in nature as well, you've got to be respectful for other people's boundaries. I know various players that wouldn't want any sort of sexual content at all, forgetting romance. anything with like nudity in it or extreme violence would put them off playing a game. So for that group, I keep that in mind. I tend to like kind of scary and usually dark and gruesome stuff, but I know with that group it needs to just be, I can tone that bit down. I can still have it scary, but I don't need to have like the unpleasant parts of horror. Although I'm a fan of it. It's about being respectful. I think again it all ties in.
Yeah, it ties in with that, and again, kind of red flag time for that, because the likes of those particular games, it's at the extreme end of what content's there.
Yeah.
Again, if you are playing it and going down that route, remember that it's not, oh, but it was just me as the DM, or oh, it was just me as this character. No, it's you as an individual is who's going to be getting the blame here if somebody gets particularly
really
uncomfortable or upset or whatever else. And at the end of the day, remember that you're an individual sitting there, you're not a character, so just be very careful with that one.
It kind of comes back to communication. You're going to hear us beating this dead horse.
Communication, respect, and
communication, being respectful of others, and actually having table savvy. Reading the room, so to speak.
Yeah. Also, maybe not a good one to be playing in a comic shop as well. That's
maybe partly why they moved to home games, because that wasn't long after that they disappeared. But I mean, if that's what they want to do, that's what they want to do. I just know that there's various players that I run with that would be uncomfortable with. I don't have anything against it. If that's what they want to do, that's okay. It's their game. And if they've all bought into a really horrible natured game, but because it's exciting or whatever, horror is exciting because it's scary, and but there's plenty of players that I know that would not want to do it. I know even our guys that are pretty hardcore, we've done some pretty horrible games. But stuff that I was getting told about their games, I know that especially our DM, he'd be like, nah, that game's not happening. Yeah. And we did games with cannibals and all that, and some based off of some expedition, in the Arctic and stuff, and it was horrible because it's real, it's a real thing. But even so, there's other extreme ends of it. Yeah, but it gets a bit Hellraiser, doesn't it?
Still toned down at that point. It wasn't like blow by blow what happened. So even then,
I think so. I thought there was pictures, if I remember right.
Yeah, there was. But do
you know what was interesting? Actually, saying that, this is slightly off topic, but it wasn't like a lot of focus on it. Actually, now that you say that, it was kind of like the set pieces, and there was actual pictures. It's fascinating, but it's
and again, the thing to kind of give the DM credit at this point here, there was the pictures there because he was basing it on historical events and so on and so on. He didn't fire the pictures into like the middle of the table so that everybody could see, because we were actually in person at that point.
This was years ago, wasn't it?
This was before the world exploded.
The world disappeared.
Exactly. So what he done there at that point is he had the pictures and went, I can show you this, but it's a bit gruesome. You might not want to see it. Just giving you a heads up and a warning here. And I can't 100% remember if he done that as the game was ticking along or if he done that at the end of the game. I can't remember. I think it was as the game was going along.
It was as it was ticking along, but he also mentioned that it was going to be a kind of more kind of gruesome game by nature. I mean, normally though that we get those advisories off the guys, and me being a horror fanatic's usually like, oh, is that it? No problem, easy peasy. Yeah. But I mean, that's something that's actually a very good example. Same thing with romantic stuff, if that's it's about, it goes back to communicating. And with him, he was very clear that it was going to be unpleasant pictures. I remember going, "What? It's weird," and changing the angle. God, it looks horrible. But but I mean, that's the thing. I mean, the guy done a lot of research, and part of the shock factor of that game was some of the content that we had there. But I mean, again, he was tactful with it. He was respectful about us. He was communicating with us. While that's a completely off-topic example, it's those approaches and that kind of personality as a DM. If you're bringing these elements in, that you do it with romance.
Yeah, and I mean, with that game, the unfortunate thing for him is that because we got the warning beforehand, and then there was one or two of us that were there that didn't want to look at the photographs and things.
Why did you not?
So, well, no, I did, but I'm talking about
the others
that were there. So,
that's right.
So because of that, it meant that you were kind of pass it down. Pass it down to the next. Oh no, right, that's right. You don't want to see it, so you're covering it and you're passing it to the next person, and so that kind of slowed the game down, and it put a bit of delay in it, and it kind of upset the rhythm. But in that particular set of circumstances, that was, to me, the best call to make, and it's just unfortunate that it kind of broke the rhythm a bit of the game because it kind of disrupted the pace a bit. But the reason that happened, and the reason that rule was flexed and broken, was because making sure everybody uncomfortable is always your number one priority, and that's what the DM stuck with at that point. So 10 out of 10.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the thing is, you don't need to have horrible pictures and all that and stuff if you don't want it, but part of that campaign, one, it was actually an interesting historical thing that we were actually learning about. I remember he said it was based off of something, so it's part of that story, that was used for a kind of horror themed game. And it was a case of, here's the stuff, here's evidence, basically, this is your prompts, that you can look at it, you don't need to, by the way, trigger warning, essentially. But, I think it was probably one of the first to go, something horrible, let's see. And I was like, I've seen this before, I think.
It was quite undignified when you snatched it out of his hand, though.
Aye. That didn't actually happen for people listening, at least I don't remember that. But that didn't actually happen. But no, anyway, it's all of that, even though it's an off-topic subject, it's about having a discussion.
Yeah.
Especially if you're a DM, make sure you're making your players aware about it. If you're a player wanting romance, talk to other players. See, you don't have to go straight to the DM. It's maybe worth saying to them instead of springing it on them. But ultimately, a decent DM wouldn't be upset with you about that. And if you're just looking for pointers, don't feel afraid to ask your players. And if you aren't sure that somebody, you can just talk to your players between games about what you guys want to do with characters as well. That will give you inspiration. It might kick off a wee romance arc that you would like to do. Maybe one of your characters has a bard and you want to go with every single person in the group at different points. If you just want to do it, go ahead. Just make sure you speak to each other, and if it happens organically during the game, that's totally fine. You can always touch base with people after the game. So I think that's really it for me in terms of the romance stuff. For me, it was something I've not fully done myself as a DM. So I wanted just to kind of cover it with this more impromptu session and get thought process. But I think for me, in terms of closing thoughts, it's really just about just making sure I'm paving a path for people to enjoy their journey with their characters. It's less about their journey with my story, more about, while that's important, it's about how their characters connect with each other, both romantically and otherwise, for the other players, and making sure that they enjoy all the beats along the way. But
again, things like communication, always going to be key. Making sure people are comfortable, it's always going to be key. And again, making sure that you're respecting other people's thoughts and views here, because like violence as a topic, you go, well, in D&D, chances are you're going to have to kill a monster at some point, right? So there needs to be some level of acceptance of violence, whereas something like romance, you don't need to have that in the story at all. So, making sure that you know what people's boundaries are and things like that, and being able to operate, and be tactile about it without being totally avert and just kind of like pointing fingers at the table and going, right, so and so, what you come for, and going through it like that. And in terms of your game and the way it's kind of started evolving, again, things like the two characters going on a watch at the same time, that introduces it subtly and slowly. And the good thing for you, for the other players at that point, again, albeit that everybody knows each other and the two I nearly said the two characters there, but the two players, Shaggy and Velma, if you remember them, they are actually romantically involved with each other in real life, so everybody's kind of got the heads up there as well, which again helps you out. But having that small interaction where they're going on watch then gives you a chance to gauge the reaction at the table if you weren't sure, and then from that point you can go, right, okay, well, you know, something comes up and there's option A to go to this place and investigate, there's option B to go and investigate to this place. So rather than for a couple of hours and then swapping over with other people, you go, you investigate, whatever happens, but then from that point, you know, somebody can then get kidnapped, this, that, you know, you've got other story elements that you can then start introducing and just make the time they spend together a little bit more, which then means you can see more of the reaction between the two, which then means you can start to gauge it with the table, with the other players. So the way that it's kind of unfolding for you just now is pretty good, I would say, because it gives you that kind of acclimatization period, and it gives you that chance to monitor what's going on. And again, albeit that everybody seems to be pretty comfortable at this point, it's still probably just as well to make sure and just double check, and that the two players don't have some crazy idea and it becomes a bit creepy and voyeuristic.
Well, we can wait until they start drinking tomorrow night, that's for sure. I'll find out some of the skeletons in the closet, if any, at that point. But I think for me then that's about everything covered. Yeah, but any final thoughts for you, other than, I've kind of gave mine, but any final thoughts from yourself other than what you've shared? I thought they were very insightful.
I think just I'm going to end up kind of repeating what I've just said basically, but
cool.
Again, as long as you're kind of going for the key, communicate, be respectful, work out the boundaries, and again, don't be afraid to stop things or put limits and things. As long as you're sticking to that, it'll work out fine. And it's again just how each individual player reacts to it. But yeah,
cool. Well, I mean, that's you've heard our take on romance, or at least you've heard my initial thoughts, especially on romance, because I'm about to be running it. So, you know, what we would love to hear is, we want to know your thoughts. We've covered this at the start, but if you've already had romance in your game, thinking about romance in your game as player or DM, or you've had a bad experience about it, I'd like to know why it was bad and how it was resolved, or if you've had a good experience with it, either as a player or someone that's been around players that have done it. We'd just love to hear your thoughts on what romance was like on your own games.
Yeah, and kind of backtracking a little bit, but my final thought. If it's creepy in real life, it's probably creepy at the table. I think that's a good rule of thumb, if nobody's puzzled that one out yet. Well,
I hadn't, so I'm glad you said it. That'll be this post-it note I stick at my DM screen.
Is this creepy? ? If yes, end.
Yeah, well, unless you're running Call of Cthulhu or another system where that's what well, maybe not with romance. But yeah, no, that's a good closing thought. So yeah, cool. Well, anyway, you know, our question for you, let us know your thoughts on romance, and you can let us know through the comments if you're on YouTube or across any of our other social media platforms.
Yeah, so the best ones to do that on would be Facebook, would be Twitter, and would be Discord. I mean, you could fire us through something on Instagram, but that might be a bit awkward, might be a bit strange. But yeah, why not? Break the mold. Create the trend. Be the Instagram comment leaver. Be the suggestion guy over there. Do that.
We promise if you put any comments on Instagram, we'll reply to it or like it or something, because I'm sure nobody really. Well, I don't engage with Instagram a lot myself. But yeah, so great. Well, thanks for watching / listening. If you're on YouTube, please, would love it if you give us a like or sub. Give us a dislike if you want as well. We don't care. Let us know what you're thinking so we know what to do next.
Well, I care if they're disliking it.
Well, at least if people dislike it, we know not to do that again.
Yeah, I mean, on a serious note, if you hate it, put a dislike on it and then tell us why, and we might not change.
But we'll think about it, and that's as much as we can promise. I think
feedback's feedback.
Yeah, that's the one. And so if that's on YouTube, do it over there, or follow us on Spotify or any of the other podcasting platforms. Apple Music, Podcasts. Apple Podcasts as well. Great, thanks for listening, guys, and watching.
Yeah, that's been interesting. Thanks. And remember, don't be creepy.
Don't be creepy. Thanks. Bye.